Note terms. All right. Typically, interest rates need to be 8 to 10%. And the reason that is important because that's what whatever you're going to make that note for, all right, when you're creating it, the secondary market is going to demand around a 10%, 8 to 10, 12% yield is what they're going to demand. Okay. If it's poorly written, all right, if it's poorly written, poorly structured, I should say, if it's a poorly structured note, you're going to get discounted where they're going to want to yield at 12%. I looked at a note. If some of you have gone on, Chris and I was talking about a note we were both looking at this past week, and I put my bid in on a yield of about 12.5%. That's what my yield was on it. But there were significant flaws in the note. All right. Now, they weren't willing to sell at that point, but there's a lot more risk that was involved that I was taking. If a note is written at 5 or 6%, and if you want to sell it onto the secondary market, or you have a time when you need to sell to get cash or whatever, you're going to take a much greater discount because the buyer is wanting an 8 to 10% yield on that note. So you're going to discount that note tremendously. Okay. Remember, when you're putting this together, all right, you're making a pie. Once it's all done, all the papers are signed, all right, the pie is baked. All right. Now, if you want to sell, anything that you did wrong and you want to sell, you're going to pay for it. So it's going to end up with a reduced payment for that note. You want at least 10% down. Again, we push for greater than that. Okay, there's people out there, particularly right now, that have greater than 10%. We won't work with anyone unless they put at least 10% down. That is a hard thing for us. We are typically in that 15 to 20% range. The average on a conventional loan down payment, just so you're aware, is 21% on a national basis. All right. Whereas the minimum is 20, but the average is 21. All right, on most typical conventional loans. Again, the reason is they need to be able to show discipline, that they know how to manage money. They also need to have skin in the game. If they got more skin in the game, less likely that they're going to default. They have more to lose is part of it. Reasonable term length, don't set anything up beyond 360 months, a 30-year note. It's okay to do, you can do whatever. You can go 240, you can go 180, 120. I've seen 120s, I've seen 180s, 240s. All right. It just depends on how much was down, what the pricing, what was the original price was, the value of the property. You've got total flexibility in there, but just don't go over 30 years. Okay. Only time you should ever be going beyond 30 years is if you have to modify a note, and that tells me if you got to modify the note right up front early in that scenario, then it tells me you didn't do that good a job of underwriting. So fixed rate and balloons. Okay, you can, even with Dodd-Frank, you can do a balloon. They discourage it, but it needs to be at least 8 years out. Okay. Keep in mind that the average note that is created lasts roughly between 5 and 10 years. So why is there a need to do a balloon? There isn't. And even if you do put a balloon into the note, if they're not in a position to get refinanced, okay, you still have to modify that note and go past the balloon. So it doesn't gain you anything, is what I'm essentially saying. So make it 30 years, 20 years, whatever, straight amortization. Make it simple, straightforward, very predictable, with giving them the ability to refinance at any time. Okay? If you've done your job right, you've already built a profit margin into the note. All right? If you're creating the note, you've already built a profit margin in there. All right? So you wanted the note to last 10 years and it got paid off in 3 years. Okay, you've already got your profit margin built in. So say you had a $20,000 profit margin built in. Well, you got it 3 years earlier than you planned on. Okay, it's great. Go create another one. Go buy a note. Okay, make it so people can succeed. That's the critical part that I want you to understand. Underwriting of the borrower. Yeah, that's pretty important. Okay, as you're looking at a seller finance note, a couple things to keep in mind. Number one, you want it to be Dodd-Frank compliant. And the biggest thing with Dodd-Frank is that they need to be able to demonstrate the ability to repay the loan. The consequences, now the exception on this, you can create up to 3 notes in a year. All right, if you're like a mom and pop, you have a property and maybe a one rental or something that you sold to someone else on that, they don't have to abide. They've pretty much been given a pass. But all of us that are here that are real estate investors, all right, whether we're part-time or full-time, if you've got more than 3 or 4 rental properties, you're going to need to definitely be this. Or if you're doing more than a couple notes, or you're doing a couple notes every year, you need to be following Dodd-Frank, all right, just to protect yourself, all right, because the fines are very onerous, all right. If the borrower defaults and then gets a decent lawyer, and a lawyer comes after you saying it was predatory lending, that's the key thing. You don't want it to be labeled as predatory lending. If you get nailed as far as being a predatory lender, the fees are onerous, quite honestly. All right, you got to pay back everything the borrower has paid to you, plus their attorney fees, plus up to a $250,000 fine. So it's something that you don't want to play with. Now, I say that not to scare you, because you honestly want the note to perform well, so it truly behooves you to follow the Dodd-Frank rules, is what it really does. And it really does help to get rid of a bunch of these people who are just doing crappy notes, and they are being predatory in what they do. All right. So the critical point here is that there are guidelines, and essentially you're going to hear a front end ratio and a back end ratio. Okay, it's kind of what the FA is. I don't know. Is there any loan originators in here or mortgage brokers? They'll know this. It's basically 33% on the front end. Okay, which is basically the house payment can be no greater than 33% of what their gross income is. And the back end ratio cannot be any greater than 45%, all right, of what their total debt is. Now, I've heard, I forget which one of them will allow up to 48%. I forget which one of the government entities. But if you stick within those guidelines, 33, 45, you've got a note that's probably going to perform, okay, and do just fine. You want to see a credit score of at least 600. If they have no credit score, all right, if they have no credit score at all, and you'll run into this, but they can prove 12 months of on-time payments with their current landlord, and the landlord will certify it, they get an automatic 620 in their underwriting. Okay. If you've got co-borrowers and someone say is at 660 and another one's around 500, 600, I mean, I've combined those to see what the average is, all right, to see if we're above that, okay, for my comfort level before I submit it. But you want it to be originated, or excuse me, not originate, you want it to be underwritten by a licensed residential mortgage loan originator, an RMLO. The one that we utilize is calltheunderwriter.com. You can write that down. Now, the ownership of that company has just recently changed, and I have not had the opportunity to use them since the ownership has changed. Russell Donnelly used to be the owner, and he sold it out to a couple, and they seem to be doing a very good job, what I've observed. I just haven't had the opportunity to use them yet. They will do all of the underwriting to determine if they're Dodd-Frank compliant. Understand, you are the final underwriter. You're the underwriter yourself. You're the one that determines whether it's going to be okay or not. They're just determining that they meet Dodd-Frank requirements as far as meeting the ability to repay the loan. All right. And that's where that protects you. And that's what protects you if they default and they try to go after you from the standpoint of being a predatory lender. Say, hey, this was professionally underwritten by a licensed RMLO. All right. His license on the line, essentially stating that it was Dodd-Frank compliant. So it protects you in many ways. All right. So you're basically looking for a credit score above 600, ideally, 650 or above. I mean, the last one that we did, they had 18,000 to put down and had a 714 credit score. Okay, but could not get bank financing because of the type of work that he does. He's self-employed. So those are the things that you're going to run into, and those are perfect candidates for seller financing. Absolutely perfect. The cost here with the call the underwriter is typically $500, unless it's changed. It's been $500 up front, and what you want the borrower to do is essentially pay that $500. They're paying for that. Think of it as origination fee. Call it whatever fee you want, but it's origination fee is what we call it, or underwriting fee. And they pay that up front before I'm going to submit all their information. If you go to their website and everything, they have everything lined up. All right, everything laid out of what needs to be completed, what needs to be filled out, all that type of stuff, and then you submit it. Be meticulous with that and get all the documentation. Don't just slap it all together. Get it all pulled together and make it in one submission at one time. It will go much smoother, much faster for you. Typically what will happen then is once you submit all that, they typically turn that around in about 48 hours. They turn it around pretty doggone fast. And what they will do, they'll give you an approval. They'll give you approval with conditions, all right, or a rejection. Now, in the past, if they got rejected, they did not charge you, okay? I don't know if that still is going to be the case now or not with the new owners. But then once, if it's approved upon conditions, then you need to provide some additional documentation. Is what typically happens there, and you have to get that from the borrower. So you gotta sit down with the borrower and be kind of like the intake specialist. All right, is whenever you go and get a loan. All right, you're going to take all this information. We've created a list of things that they need to bring when we sit down, so that we can make copies of that. We scan all that up and we send it in one file to the underwriter. Then that's what we basically do. Some of the stuff, they're going to need a 2-year. We always ask for 2 years of tax return. Another critical thing is you got to determine, how do they make their income? Are they seasonal? All right. We've got certain, there's certain people that work 10 months out of the year. All right. And then December and January, they're on unemployment. But they meet all the other qualifications as far as the amount of income they make for the year, et cetera. They've learned over the years how to live like that. They'll never get bank financed. Okay. That is an absolutely perfect seller finance type of scenario. Okay. Another scenario would be someone who has gone along, they've paid rent, or they've owned a home at one time. They've had a catastrophic life situation that's happened in their life. We had a couple that was a renter for us for 6-7 years. All right. Paid on time. The house was beautiful as the day that we rehabbed it. They've taken fantastic care of that home as if it was their home. They still couldn't get bank finance because they had filed bankruptcy. All right. And they had a foreclosure on them. All right. And they still could not get bank financing. But yet in 6 years, they were never late with a payment. We seller finance that home to them. They're perfect. They've never been late once on rent, or even since we've done the note with them. That's another perfect candidate. So if you got long-term tenants that, they've been saving up some money or stuff like that, all of our rentals, we allow them to earn credits. In this particular situation, they had earned a little over $3,000 of rent credits over that 6 years, and then they put 3,000 down, so they had 6,000, all right, as a down payment, and the house was about 60 grand. Okay, so you still worked at that 10%. So those are kind of the situations that you're looking for. Let me see here. I'm looking at my notes, making sure I've got. The key thing is you got to have income that is documented, is able to be documented. 1099 is fine. If they're a 1099 worker, that's fine. You just got to make sure that you get a 1099 from the last 2 previous years. All right. If they're paid in cash, not going to work. Okay. You've got to get some type of documentation of their income. So that's what you've got to do. Have their employer write a check, all right, or do something along that line, or have it automatically directed into their checking account. That's the critical thing. You got to have documentation of income. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So if they're getting paid out of the table with all cash, it just doesn't fly. You can't do it. With the employment history, you're really looking for someone that is stable. You're not looking for someone who's been jumping around at a job. All right. They've had 3 jobs in the last year. No, that's not going to fly. They may meet every other criteria, but that's not who you're looking for. You want individuals who are stable. They're consistent in what they're doing in their life. I know the banks want at least 2 years consistent employment. I'm not as critical with that. We had a nurse who basically is a traveling nurse that can't get financing right now because instead of taking paid time off in between jobs, she decided to go on a vacation for 2 weeks. Okay, and the banks are viewing that as inconsistent employment, and now that's stupid. Okay, that's just absolutely asinine in my eyes. Okay, because she has good down payment. She's got 10% down payment. She makes good income, debt to income. Everything else is fine. Okay. But they won't finance her because of that. That's a perfect seller finance scenario. All right. You'll run into situations like that. All right. Let's see here. If they're renting, you need to find out how are they paying rent. If they're paying rent in cash, that's not going to fly. You need to get them paying cashier's check, money order, keeping the receipts of the money order. The landlord will verify that they've been paying on time as well. And you've got the landlord verification on there. That can count. That will count. That will help. All right, for them as well. They got to be able to verify that they're take-home pay. The debt to income ratios, already covered that. You want to do some background checks as well. For Indiana, you can go on mycase.in.gov as just an initial review, seeing if there's, whether they're a responsible individual. All right. Are they been drunk, DUIs, everything else. All right. Or are they, if they've got speeding tickets and stuff like that, it's not a big deal. Okay. But you want to see that they are responsible individuals. I will also go and check them out see if I can find them on Facebook. All right. You'll be amazed at what you can reveal. What you can find out, all you're essentially doing, you're not trying to be a stalker or anything like that. All you're trying to do is determine what the character is of the individual. All right. And I do this also when I'm looking at notes before I will pull the trigger on putting a bid in for the notes. I'll see if I can find the borrowers on Facebook in that community and just see what they're talking about and seeing who they are. And the one note that I purchased not too long ago, it's in Three Rivers, Michigan. They had recently, within a year, they had purchased their home, and they had pictures of how they had fixed it up and the Christmas pictures of the home and everything. It looked beautiful. I was like, great, I'm going to buy this note. They're taking good care of the place. Okay. So you learn, you're just going to find out what kind of people, all right, they are. That's what you're looking for. You're just looking for responsible individuals. That's what you're basically looking for. Also want to check out on bankruptcies. Bankruptcies can screw everything up it's not insurmountable. You can work through it, but you certainly don't want to be going into it that way when a recently filed bankruptcy has taken place. All right. You can go to pacer.uscourts.gov. You write that down, pacer.uscourts.gov, and you can check on bankruptcy filing. If they've had a bankruptcy filing and it's been 2, 3, 4 years ago, it's been settled, all right, you're fine. That would not bother me as long as they meet the other criteria. And then check them out on social media, as I said.